He'd worn the badge for over a decade, served his country, protected lives, and upheld the law with pride. But on this quiet afternoon, none of that mattered. To one officer, he wasn't a hero. He was just another black man behind the wheel. What started as a routine traffic stop would spiral into a career-ending mistake, and a lesson in the danger of judging a man by the color of his skin. This isn't just another police story. It's the truth that changed everything. Before we dive in, subscribe and hit the bell, because some stories are too important to ignore. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We want to hear your voice as this story unfolds. It was a calm Tuesday afternoon in a quiet Columbus neighborhood. Gary Williams, a decorated U.S. Marshal with over 15 years of service, had just finished a routine work assignment and was heading home. Known among his colleagues for his professionalism, composure, and dedication, Gary carried the weight of his badge with pride, but also with humility. His day had been long, filled with arrests, paperwork, and the constant responsibility of keeping the public safe. He wasn't looking for trouble. In fact, trouble rarely found him in these peaceful streets. Gary's sedan moved steadily along tree-lined avenues, following the speed limit, the radio playing softly in the background. To him, it was just another drive home, another day of doing his duty. He thought about dinner plans, perhaps a quiet evening to unwind. But the ordinary rhythm of his day would soon be shattered. Across the street, Officer Leonard Shaw was on patrol. 8 years into his career, he had a history peppered with complaints, mostly ignored or brushed aside by superiors. Shaw scanned the streets with a suspicious eye, seeking justification for action even when there was none. When his gaze landed on Gary's black sedan, a spark of preconceived assumptions ignited. Gary remained unaware of the attention, focused solely on returning home safely. Yet the air was thick with tension, a storm silently building. One wrong turn, one flash of lights, one decision based on bias, and the calm afternoon would spiral into a confrontation that would change lives forever. In the next few minutes, what began as a routine drive would expose the harsh reality of racial profiling, the fragility of authority, and the dangerous consequences of letting prejudice dictate action. Gary's calm drive took an unexpected turn as the flash of red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was a routine traffic stop, a simple misunderstanding. But as the sirens grew louder, a sinking feeling settled deep in his chest. He had faced dangerous criminals before, situations where split-second decisions could mean life or death, but this felt different. This was not about danger. This was about suspicion without reason, a judgment cast solely on who he was and the color of his skin. The officer pulled alongside, his gaze sharp, his demeanor tense. Gary slowed and signaled, careful to keep his hands visible on the steering wheel. Every instinct from years of training told him to stay calm, comply, and assess. Yet a wave of disbelief and unease washed over him. This was no ordinary stop. The officer, Leonard Shaw, approached with an aggression that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Shaw's eyes darted, scanning Gary and his vehicle as if expecting a crime that wasn't there. Gary explained that he was a U.S. Marshal, his credentials safely tucked in his jacket, and asked permission to retrieve them. But Shaw refused. Instead, he demanded Gary step out immediately. Compliance was not optional. Every action Gary took, every measured word he spoke, seemed only to escalate the officer's hostility. Shaw's hand hovered near his weapon. His body language radiated suspicion and control, not authority rooted in fairness. As Gary moved carefully from the car, keeping his hands visible, neighbors began to notice the confrontation. A few opened windows. One grabbed a phone to record. The presence of witnesses was growing, but it did nothing to calm the situation. Shaw's questioning was relentless, his tone sharp, his accusations unspoken but unmistakable. "What are you doing here?" The look in his eyes demanded, though the words were never phrased as a request. Gary's calm explanations were brushed aside. He had trained for dangerous encounters, but this felt personal, biased, and entirely unnecessary. The tension mounted when Shaw demanded to search the vehicle. Gary stated clearly that he would not consent, citing legal protections afforded to federal agents. Shaw ignored him. Each second stretched into eternity, every movement scrutinized under the hot glare of authority misused. Gary complied with every order, placing his hands where they could be seen, showing restraint that contrasted sharply with Shaw's growing aggression. The neighborhood had grown quiet, people watching from porches, curiosity and fear mingling. Cameras from 3 angles now captured every detail. Backup was called, but Shaw's report to dispatch painted a distorted picture. A suspicious individual claiming to be a federal agent, uncooperative and potentially dangerous. In reality, Gary had been nothing but professional and calm from the start. The arrival of 2 more officers brought a glimmer of hope, a chance for sanity to return to the escalating scenario. One of the officers, more experienced, immediately questioned Shaw about letting Gary show his identification. Shaw brushed it off, unwilling to relinquish control, insisting he knew best. Gary repeated his credentials, badge number, number, and location of identification. Precise, professional, unwavering. Even with this clarity, Shaw's suspicion did not waver. The situation teetered on a knife's edge. Every decision, every refusal, every second of hesitation risked turning a tense stop into a career-ending, possibly life-altering catastrophe for both men. Finally, Shaw reached into the vehicle, ignoring protocol, and retrieved Gary's credentials himself. For a moment, silence fell. Reality hit hard. Shaw had illegally detained a federal agent, violated protocols, and the neighborhood had witnessed it all. Gary remained composed, documenting the scene quietly with his phone, building the evidence that would expose the injustice. But the story was far from over, because in the next moments, the consequences of unchecked prejudice were about to unfold in ways no one could ignore. The tension reached its peak as Gary stood at the side of his car, hands steady, heart racing beneath a calm exterior. Shaw's aggression had escalated to an almost palpable level. His voice was sharp, his body rigid, his suspicion unchecked. Every instinct Gary had honed over 15 years of law enforcement screamed at him to stay composed, but the danger was no longer hypothetical. This was real. Every decision Shaw made was a deliberate escalation, a collision between authority and bias, and Gary was caught in the center. Neighbors watched from windows and porches, phones raised, recording every second. The air felt heavy with expectation, like the quiet before a storm. Shaw demanded that Gary get against the trunk, hands visible. Gary complied, careful not to provoke a reaction, careful to stay alive, careful to follow the law that was supposed to protect him. He had faced armed fugitives, violent confrontations, life-or-death situations, but nothing compared to being treated like a criminal for simply existing, for driving through a neighborhood where he belonged. Shaw's hands hovered near his weapon. Each word, each gesture radiated suspicion and control, not reason. The unjust weight of authority pressed down on Gary as he calmly explained for what felt like the 100th time who he was, where his credentials were, and why he had every right to remain compliant without fear. But Shaw would not relent. The intensity of the moment escalated further when he reached into the vehicle himself, retrieving Gary's credentials in a blatant disregard for procedure. Every second stretched, every onlooker holding their breath, witnessing a law enforcement officer blatantly abusing power. Time seemed suspended. Gary's heart pounded, but his exterior remained composed. His mind raced, not with fear for his life, but with the realization that the injustice he was facing was bigger than this one stop, bigger than this one officer. He documented every detail quietly, taking mental notes, photos, and recordings, building the evidence that would soon hold the system accountable. And then, the turning point, the moment of undeniable clarity. Shaw stared at the credentials, realization dawning too late. Every violation, every lie, every unlawful act had been caught on camera, from the body cam to the neighbors' phones. The room for denial had vanished. The storm Shaw had unleashed was now turning on him. Gary stepped back, calm but resolute, his professionalism unshaken even as the world watched. The consequences of this single afternoon were about to unfold. Careers, reputations, and the very definition of justice hanging in the balance. And in that charged silence, the truth became unavoidable. One man's prejudice had set a chain reaction that could not be undone. The aftermath was both quiet and deafening. Gary drove away that afternoon with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief that the immediate danger had passed, but exhaustion from knowing the truth. Even a decorated law enforcement officer was not immune to bias and prejudice. Every action he had taken, calm, compliant, lawful, had been met with suspicion, aggression, and escalation. What should have been a routine drive had become a test of patience, courage, and perseverance. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Videos captured by neighbors circulated online, and the story quickly escalated from a local disturbance to a national conversation. The footage left no room for doubt. Shaw had acted with bias, ignoring protocol, and escalating the situation unnecessarily. Public outrage followed, demanding accountability, not just for one officer, but for the system that had allowed him to act unchecked for years. For Gary, the experience was more than personal. It was a mirror of a larger, painful reality. If a federal marshal could be profiled, detained, and threatened simply because of the color of his skin, what did that mean for ordinary citizens with no authority, no platform, no protection? The story illuminated the persistent patterns of racial injustice that continue to shape everyday life, exposing the consequences of prejudice when power and authority intersect with bias. The fallout was swift for Shaw. Investigations confirmed the violations. His career, reputation, and freedom were all destroyed in a matter of weeks. Beyond individual consequences, the incident sparked systemic change. Policies were reevaluated, training programs were implemented, and officers were reminded that accountability was not optional, it was required. But perhaps the most enduring impact was the conversation it forced society to have about bias, about law enforcement, and about the responsibility each of us has to stand against injustice. Gary returned to his duties, steadfast and focused, not seeking attention or accolades. Yet his experience left a mark far beyond his own life. It became a case study, a cautionary tale, and a reminder that vigilance, both personal and societal, is essential. Ordinary citizens, bystanders, and fellow officers alike were reminded that justice requires awareness, courage, and the willingness to record, report, and demand accountability. This story leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. The system is only as fair as the people who uphold it. Every act of bias, unchecked and unchallenged, carries consequences that ripple far beyond a single moment. How many lives continue to be affected by assumptions, prejudice, and fear? How many more stories remain untold, waiting for someone brave enough to speak the truth? The question now is yours. Will you notice, will you record, and will you demand justice when it matters most? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. Share this video to spark conversation and raise awareness, because every voice counts in the fight against injustice. We want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what do you think needs to change to stop stories like this from happening again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could inspire someone else to take action. Remember, awareness is the first step toward change. Don't just watch, be part of the solution.